Hello YouTube, how's it going? This is the crossover and I'm back with another video. Today I'm going to be going through my mock draft for the upcoming 2021 NBA draft. As of the making of this video, this draft is going to be occurring in 2 days. So before then, I wanted to get out my thoughts on which teams I think should be looking at which prospects. This is going to be based on my big board and where I have the players ranked personally. So as with the big board, the mock draft isn't going to be, as you typically see, on sites such as like Tankathon or Bleacher Report. It's going to be based on my opinion. And again, the time that I've spent, examining and scouting each of these prospects. So this is again going to be my opinion on which teams I think should be looking at which players, and we're going to be going through the whole first round today. So without further ado, let's get into it. To start off the mock draft, as I did with the big board, I'm going to be going through picks 1 through 10. So the first three picks, Detroit selecting Cade Cunningham, Houston selecting Jalen Green, and Cleveland selecting Evan Mobley. I've gone through all these picks in all these teams' individual videos, so I'm not going to be covering them now. So we're just going to jump right off the bat with pick number 4. I have the Toronto Raptors selecting James Bouknight, who I believe to be the fourth best player in this draft. As I stated, in the big board video, I believe, James Bouknight to not only be the fourth best player in this draft, but I also, Jalen Suggs is typically the lock here at 4 for Toronto. And I just think he's the consensus is that he's going to be a great role player. From my evaluation, I think he is going to be a great role player. And, the worst parts of his games are his inconsistent handle and jump shot. So, he's not going to be an offensive star or anything. And if you are taking a guard in the top 5, you want him to be that offensive star. So again, like a great role player. When is Toronto going to be picking in the top 4? Again, they technically won the lottery. They were one of the big winners in the lottery. So, why would you take a great role player at 4? You can get that, later in the draft or, in free agency you can trade for him. But if you really want a franchise star, you don't go for a great role player in the top 4. So I have them selecting James Bouknight. I've gone over this in my big board. I think he's the fourth best prospect in this draft. I really love James Bouknight, that size, that athleticism, that three-way scoring ability. I think he gets slide in right next to Fred VanVleet for Toronto. Arguably be their number one option from day one, especially depending on what happens with Pascal Siakam, if he does get traded or not out of Toronto. He could come in and slide in and be, their number one option from day one and, grow into a franchise player for them. But moving on to the fifth pick in the draft, I have the Orlando Magic selecting Josh Giddey. This pick was pretty tough for me because, as with the consensus, I mean, based on my big board, I had Scotty Barnes in like the bottom 5 players. I had Jonathan Kuminga as a mid, right around 17, 18. So, I didn't have any of those players in consideration for this pick for the Magic. I was debating taking Alperen Sengun, but they already have Wendell Carr, who seems to be their center of the future, as well as Mo Bamba, depending on what they want to do with him. I was debating JT Thor or Moses Moody this high, but I was like, I don't know about taking them that high. And then I thought, hey, Josh Giddey, I think, he's probably the best bet for Orlando at 5, with how big he is. He could slide in at that 3 or 2, whatever position they want to put him at, he could play. And they really don't have like a high level playmaker like Josh Giddey. Markelle Fultz is kind of like an all around point guard, right? But he's kind of good, not great at really anything, especially not shooting the ball. But Josh Giddey would come in and be the de facto playmaker, could bring some real excitement to Orlando, which they haven't had in a while. And given how young he is and how successful of a shot, his shot's been all right, but it's been much better than expected, especially in the Olympics. I think he could grow into a real star and be, a real exciting player that Orlando hasn't had in a long time, especially being how young he is at that size with that playmaking ability. And again, they could slide him at whatever position they want to. Moving on to the 6th pick in the draft, I have the Oklahoma City Thunder selecting Alperen Sengun. Now, as those of you who have watched my big board, you would know that I have Alperen Sengun top 5. Being in Turkish League MVP at 18 years old, you got to be damn good to be able to do something like that. And as a result, I have him going here to Oklahoma City. I would have had him going 5th to Orlando, but again, they have those 2 bigs. While OKC, they don't have any bigs. They just traded Moses Brown and Al Horford. So they have a gap at center to fill. I think Alperen Sengun would have great synergy with Shea, as a post player, a high IQ player who hopefully I expect to be able to space the floor around the mid range a little bit coming into the NBA. Again, I've said that I believe that eventually over time he can become an average 3-point shooter for a big. But given how talented he is in the post, how polished he is as a role man, sneaky athletic, I think he'd come in and he could arguably be that second option on the team. Excuse me, behind Shea right off the bat. Moving on to the 7th pick in the draft, I have the Golden State Warriors selecting Jalen Suggs out of Gonzaga. Again, I have Jalen Suggs valued outside of the top 10, but when you look at what Golden State needs, another guard, it's a player. A lot of people have Davion Mitchell going at this spot at 7, and I think Jalen Suggs is a much better version of Davion Mitchell, and I think he would come and fit really well in Golden State. You consider how well he did fit in to that Gonzaga NBA-styled offense without all that spacing around him. And now in Golden State, he'd be surrounded by the two of the greatest shooters of all time. You're hoping James Wiseman maybe takes another step. Maybe Draymond Green. They could really use Jalen Suggs, right? He's not all that much of a half-court threat at the moment. Maybe he'll develop that over time, but again, in that Golden State Warriors system, you could run pick and rolls on him and Steph. You could run pick and rolls on him and Steph Curry. They could use him as a cutter in transition. He could run on defense. He could cover, for Steph, and I'm assuming Clay now because Clay's coming off of two major knee injuries. So I think that fit would be amazing for Golden. I think that fit between Suggs and Golden State would be amazing. Moving on to pick number 8 with the Orlando Magic, I have them selecting JT Thor out of Auburn. Again, kind of similar to Jonathan Kuminga in the sense that he's really young and really raw, but the athletic traits are there. But I think he's just a better version of Kuminga. I think he has better touch than Kuminga. He shot better from 3. He's just a better shooter in general than Kuminga. He's taller, stronger, faster than Kuminga, bigger than Kuminga. I think he's a better defender than Kuminga, and I think he has a better IQ than Kuminga, and he's younger than him. So I see no reason why JT Thor would not be the pick here. And I think again he'd come in and play a similar role to what a lot of people think Kuminga could come in and do for the Magic, right? Be that young, raw forward, as they do have a hole at the small forward position. And I think JT Thor could slide in there and grow and potentially become, a real two-way threat for this Orlando Magic team. And, they're coming out with a haul in this mock draft that I have. They're coming out with a haul of Josh Giddey and JT Thor, right? You're getting two big, versatile, positionless players who probably come into your team and arguably are the two players with the highest upside out of anybody else on the roster. So, if it does occur like this in the Magic, I think that's a great haul for them. Moving on to the Sacramento Kings, who I really struggled with who to pick here for the Kings. I had a couple people in mind, but I landed on Moses Moody, right? If you're selecting in the top 10, you might as well just select the best player available. And I think Moses Moody is that for the Sacramento Kings. They already have a plethora of guards, right? De'Aaron Fox, Buddy Hield, Tyrese Halliburton. But I think Moses Moody, he's around 6'6". I think he could slide into that small forward position, which I think Harrison Barnes is in reality at this point in his career, given how he's lost a bit of speed. I think he could slide it. I think he's really a power forward. And I think Moses Moody can really play the 3 in the NBA, just given how long of a wingspan he has and how solid his body is and how high of an IQ he does have. I think he could slide into that 3 and defend 2s, 3s, and some point guards. And I think offensively he'd be able to space the floor, catch and shoot. Really provide De'Aaron Fox and Tyrese Halliburton more space to operate on the court. So I think that would be a great fit on both sides of the ball for Sacramento. I was debating going with a center here, but I don't really value centers all that high, even though they do have one. I think they could find a long-term center in free agency or trade for one. Getting as good of a 3D player as Moses Moody projects to be at 9, I think is better value than selecting a big man here. And then moving on to end out the top 10, I have the Memphis Grizzlies selecting Quentin Grimes. I'm not sure if anybody doesn't know, but right before I started recording this video, the Memphis Grizzlies and New Orleans Pelicans swapped their 10th and 17th picks with a couple other players involved. But for 10, the Memphis Grizzlies, I had them selecting Quentin Grimes. I think Quentin Grimes is a top 10 player in this class, given his two-way potential, both as a scorer, a catch-and-shoot threat, and, a three-way scorer. 3-level scorer, a catch and shoot threat, as well as a guy who can attack off closeouts. I think he's going to be an awesome player in the NBA. And he's an awesome on-ball defender as well, given that 6'5", 6'6" frame, how strong he is, how quick he is. Again, I think he just his two-way prowess and is going to really, really, really show, is going to make him a super valuable player at the NBA level. And he's going to come in from day one and have an impact. And I think he has legitimate star upside. Even though Memphis already has a couple other, two guard players, I think Dylan Brooks, given his, he has a certain lack of foot speed, and given that he is 6'7", I think he's more of a small forward. They do have a couple bench pieces like Desmond Bane and Grayson Allen to fill in that two guard spot, but Quentin Grimes could give them a legitimate, second option. If his offensive game does continue to grow, which I expect it to, next to Ja. And I think, given this trade, they do have the assets to slide everyone down a spot. I think Kyle Anderson is really more of a 4. I think Dylan Brooks is really more of a 3. Jaren Jackson, I'm assuming, in this trade, they traded away Jonas Valanciunas, so I'm expecting, with Jaren Jackson to have a real full offseason to work on his body, work on his skill, to slide down to the 5, and as well as them acquiring Steven Adams, it really doesn't make sense to draft another 5 if he's going to be buried behind those guys. So for me, I'd go with the guy with the highest potential here for the Grizzlies, and I think Quentin Grimes would come in day one, give them a two-way impact, and potentially become that legitimate second option behind Ja Morant. Next up for picks 11 through 10, to start off at 11, I have the Charlotte Hornets selecting Franz Wagner. I was debating between Wagner and, like an Isaiah Jackson, a center, which they desperately need. But I decided to go with Wagner and stand by my philosophy that, big men, especially in today's NBA, you could find, in the trade market or free agency when you're selecting as high of a pick at 11, unless it's like a can't miss big man prospect like a Evan Mobley or like an Alperen Şengün. Then in that case, you go with the highest value player. And for me, especially looking at Charlotte's needs, I think at this pick, the pick has to be Franz Wagner, right? You look at defensively in Michigan, I think he took advantage of his size a lot. And I think, for Charlotte, he would be able to play he's definitely a 4, and I think he'd be able to play some small ball 5. And, when I think he would be at his best then, where he could take advantage of his size as he did in college. But he can guard the perimeter as well, which means he'd come in and be a very valuable defensive piece for them, especially given how many average to below average defenders they do have on the roster. LaMelo Ball was an average defender, right? Much more engaged than we thought he would be last year, but still average. Devontae Graham is not a good defender. Terry Rozier, average at best. So I think he'd come in and be almost like a safety blanket for those guys. Offensively, I think he would be, relegated to a catch and shoot player more than not. I think the shot is a lot worse than people have given him credit for, but I think he can get to a respectable level, and when the ball's swinging around, I think he can make some great passes, as he does have a great knack for finding the open man. So I think Franz Wagner is the pick at 11. At 12, I have Jonathan Kuminga going to the San Antonio Spurs. I think that this is an awesome fit, a perfect fit, really. This is a team that's really guard heavy, right? They got, DeJounte Murray, Derek White, Lonnie Walker, Trey Jones. Really, their only other, player of significance to part of their young core that's not really a guard is maybe I'd say Luka Samanic, but even then he doesn't really see the floor. And, Jakob Poeltl had a great season for them, last year as one of the best rim protectors in the league, but, they don't really have a forward. DeRozan's probably going to be gone, and Rudy Gay, I'd assume, is going to be gone as well. So I expect Jonathan Kuminga to slide into that 3-4 spot, and I think he can realize that upside in San Antonio. Given the shooting coaches that they have, he probably come in, with Derek White being. I'd assume Derek White would be the option from day one, and I'd assume Jonathan Kuminga would either be, that second, third option, maybe behind Lonnie Walker. But I think that would be a great fit, with those shooting coaches that they have. He could learn and grow and take his time developing into the player that a lot of people expect him to be. And I think that for him to reach that ceiling of being that two-way star, I think he needs to be in a system like what San Antonio can provide for him. And then at 13, I have the Indiana Pacers selecting Jalen Johnson out of Duke. Now, I didn't have Jalen Johnson on my big board, but, looking at Indiana's needs, they're kind of stuck in NBA no man's land. And I think, what they could use is a boom or bust prospect. So I decided to go with Jalen Johnson, Johnson, is really, in my opinion, the biggest boomer bust prospect. I think he's either going to be super good or a bottom tier role player. He has character concerns. Went to 4 different high schools. Dropped out of Duke because he wanted to come into the draft while they were losing, which is not a good look. I think he could offer some playmaking. The best comparison I have for him is a downgrade version of Ben Simmons, which is a player that Indiana has been looking to trade for. And I think Jalen Johnson could come in. He has potential as a defensive threat. Being that 6'10" frame, could guard multiple positions on defense and offense with that playmaking and slashing capabilities. The shot is going to be a process, but if it does hit, Jalen Johnson, in my opinion, is the biggest boomer bust prospect, and I think Indiana should take a flyer on him. Just to see if he does hit, then they could get out of that that NBA no man's land. Excuse me. At pick 14, I have the Golden State Warriors selecting Trey Murphy. Again, with the 7th pick, they already took a guard. So at 14, I didn't want to be redundant and take another guard. So I decided to go with Trey Murphy. Again, 3-and-D role player, have great defensive impact for Golden State to slide in at that 3 spot. Maybe come off the bench for them. Really give them a surefire, 3-and-D prospect at that 6'9" frame. Something that Golden State doesn't really have, a player who could defend at the level that Trey Murphy can, and as well as shoot the ball at the level that Trey Murphy can. So it's a match made in heaven. Moving on to pick 17, I have the Washington Wizards selecting Trey Mann. Now Washington has taken 2 forwards in back-to-back drafts, and Rui Hachimura and Deni Avdija, 2 players that I don't like the fit between. The synergy between those 2 players is not there. The synergy between those 2 players and Russell Westbrook, as well as Bradley Beal, is not there. Thomas Bryant, their starting center, tore his ACL early on last year, and I think he showed great flashes offensively. So I don't have. I think the obvious position is a guard. I think sooner or later Russell Westbrook and Bradley Beal are going to break up. You already are invested in that center position in Thomas Bryant. You already selected 2 forwards. I mean, Trey Mann, I have him top 10 on my board. I think he'd come into Washington, give them some 3-point shot creation, which they don't have on this roster outside of Bradley Beal. And he'd really bring this team something that they don't have. A guy who could create his own shot, especially his own 3-point shot at that size. It's a very valuable skill set in today's NBA, and I think Trey Mann would be the 3rd guard for Washington. And I think, assuming if they do keep Russell Westbrook and Bradley Beal for at least this year or at least 2 years, I think Trey Mann they could run a 3-guard set with Trey Mann, as he'd probably be their best shooter on the team. Given Davis Bertans' struggles this past year. And I think, if they do decide to move on for Russell Westbrook, Trey Mann could take over, be that starting point guard, and really have better. I think he would have great synergy with Deni Avdija and Rui Hachimura, because he can space the floor, and those guys struggle with that. Moving on to pick 16, I have the Oklahoma City Thunder going with Nashawn Highland. That shot creation ability that he has. What I've compared him to before, especially in the big board video, I compare him to a bigger version of Emmanuel Quickley. And really, I like him a lot better than Emmanuel Quickley, which, is a skill set that Oklahoma doesn't really have. Assuming that they do go with Şengün, Lou Dort is a not all that great of a shooter. Darius Bazley is one of the worst shooters in the NBA. Poku was a horrible shooter last year. Shea has gotten better. I'd say he's a really good shooter, but they don't have that guy who can really space the floor, especially from the 3-point from behind the arc, which I think Highland can give them. And I think Highland can also give them some upside, with that shot creation ability that he does have. We've seen glimpses both in college and as well as, the NBA Combine, where he killed it in the scrimmages. So he'd come in and give them some 3-point shot creation, which they sorely lack on this young Thunder team. Moving on to the 17th pick, I have the New Orleans Pelicans selecting Cameron Thomas. Looking at their roster, originally I was looking towards them selecting a big man, but now they have Jonas Valanciunas at the 5 and Zion at the 4. I think that's an all right fit. Ingram at the 3. I would expect him to bring back Lonzo Ball, given the relationship he has with Brandon Ingram and Zion, and I think it is a solid fit. And even if they do let him go, they have Kyra Lewis, who they just drafted last year. So my pick here was Cameron Thomas. They need a guy who could come in and get buckets off the bench, and at the very least, a guy who can space the floor. The best scorer in college basketball last year. So I would expect him to come in and get buckets off the bench for this Pelicans team, which they need a guy another guy to give them some excitement outside of Ingram and Zion. Again, at the very least, the guy who can space the floor for them. Don't expect too much defense from Cam Thomas, but for a team that lacks really any excitement or any positive players outside of Zion and Brandon Ingram, I think Cameron Thomas can come in and give New Orleans some excitement and give them some other shot creation and some 3-point shot creation as well, similar to Trey Mann, where Ingram is much more of a mid-range scorer. Zion is one the most dominant interior paint scorer outside of Giannis. So Cam Thomas could give the Pelicans something that they don't have, in that 3-point shot creation. Moving on to the Oklahoma City Thunder at 18. Again, I have them selecting Keon Johnson. First off, I had them selecting Şengün. You get your center for the future. Next up, I have them selecting Highland, who I think would have great synergy with Shea. And then now I have them going with the banking on that upside in Keon Johnson. We all know that athletic traits that he does have. I think he'd come in, be a great defender on and off the ball for them. Offensively, that is going to be a process, but, I think that is a gamble, worth taking at this 18th pick for the Thunder, given that you already got, assuming Şengün starts at center, I think Highland already comes in and would be their starting point guard. Next to Shea, assuming that Kemba Walker does get traded or when he does get traded, I think Highland would be the starting point guard. So you could take a flyer on Keon Johnson, see if he could turn into something offensively, and if you can, you could have a real two-way freak on your hands. But for now, I think he would be a role man, maybe with Highland, maybe with Kemba, maybe with Shea as well, but really be a defensive menace to start off his career. And, this is really a flyer on the crazy athleticism that he does have. Moving on to pick 19, my New York Knicks. With the 19th pick, I have my Knicks taking Chris Duarte. Originally, I was thinking about taking one of the guards here, but, if I'm the Knicks and I do keep my 2 picks, I am expecting us to move up. Thibodeau doesn't like to play 2 rookies, as we saw last year. So, taking 2 rookies again doesn't really make too much sense. So at the pick 19, I say that they take Chris Duarte because I think Chris Duarte is a much more valuable player than Butler or Springer, any of the guards remaining here. Given his prowess as a 2-way 3-and-D role player, despite his age, he's a great shooter and great defender at that 6'6" frame, which is something that the Knicks don't really have. We don't really have that high level 2-way role player, especially at that guard spot, which is very valuable. So I think Chris Duarte is a higher asset than and a more how should I say attractive player than Jared Butler or Jaden Springer. So that's why I have the Knicks snagging him at 19, pick him up first, and then you could select. My thought process was, we could take that 3-and-D role player at 19, as opposed to, giving other teams the chance to sneak up and take him up ahead of us, at 20, whether the Hawks want him or, the Lakers could trade up and want him. So I have, I'd say that the Knicks take him at 19 and select whichever one of the guards is left over. But a 3-and-D role player would come in and space the floor for RJ and Randall, and assuming we whichever point guard we do get, whether we're going to trade for one or sign one in free agency, or we draft one, and as well as be a high-level perimeter defender. What more can you ask? We don't really have all too many players like that, so Chris Duarte would automatically get big minutes on this Knicks team. And then the final pick of this list, I have at 20 the Atlanta Hawks going after Jared Butler. Thank God he got cleared. Happy for him. He's a great player, going to be a great role player. I compare him to a right-handed Jalen Brunson, but take away a little bit of offense, add that to the defensive end. I think he come into Atlanta. They sorely need that backup point guard. Lou Williams is getting ready to retire. Rondo didn't work out for them. You need another player out there. You need another player on the roster besides Trae Young, who can run the offense, who can kind of weather the storm when Trae Young isn't out there. I was thinking about going with somebody who's much more of a scorer. Like I was originally thinking about Trey Mann when I was originally just looking at, not the mock draft necessarily, but just players who would fit with Atlanta. I was thinking about, maybe a Trey Mann, maybe like a Cam Thomas, maybe that sort of level of player. But I think they need a guy who could just come in and run the offense, given all the scoring options that they do already have on this team, right? Trey Mann is much more of a scorer, while as on Atlanta's roster, they already have Bogdan, Gallo. You're expecting Cam Reddish to take another step next year if they don't trade him. You're expecting DeAndre Hunter. You already have John Collins. I think they should aim for much more of a floor general rather than a scorer with pick 20, and that's exactly what Jared Butler is. He'd be a much better defender than Trey Young, and I think he could he could even play alongside Trey Young. I think he could spot up for Trey Young off catch and shoot opportunities. He can handle the offense and get other guys shots, and he's expected to just come in and fill a role off the bench while Trey Young gets his rest. To finish out the last 10 picks of my mock draft, at 21, I have my Knicks up again on the board again, and I have us going with Jaden Springer, 6'4" combo guard. I think it's slide in, guard multiple positions off the bench for us. Guard both two guards as well as point guards. On offense, he can handle the ball, run the offense, and I think he had a great synergy with Randall, as Randall is a very ball dominant player. He could both handle the ball, set up the offense as well as spot up and attack off closeouts. Really a great role player. And, I'm expecting this as a Knicks fan. What my hopes are is that we go after a player like Kyle Lowry, Chris Paul, Mike Conley in free agency to get, like that star level point guard. But Jaden Springer would come off the bench and be our backup guard. With him quickly, assuming they pick Duarte and Obi Toppin off the bench, that's a very young, exciting bench to have, moving forward for us. And I think he would be a great two-way player for us to select. And, even if we don't go after, like a star point guard, I think Springer could still slide in, at that starting spot and run our offense and be a valuable, 3-and-D guard for us moving forward. Pick 22, I have the Lakers selecting Jason Preston. Despite him being a second-round pick, being mocked in the second round, I believe he's a first-round talent. His shooting as well as playmaking upside. He can make just about any pass in the book. No looks. He's an awesome pick and roll player. Best way to describe him as what I said in my big board. I think he plays kind of like high school LaMelo Ball. Very loose, very fun player to watch. I think he come and bring some excitement to the Lakers. They don't really have anything like him, a player that could shoot as well as he can, as well as, make any pass in the book like he can. He'd come in, I assume he'd be the backup point guard to run the offense for the Lakers, when Bron and AD are off the floor. Even when they're on the floor, I think he could space the floor for both of them. But when they're not on the floor, I expect him to run the offense, and he could really bring some excitement to LA, especially at that 6'4" frame. Moving on to pick 23, as well as 24, I have the Rockets selecting Miles McBride and Usman Garuba. Miles McBride, the best way to put him, as I say, he's a younger version of Davion Mitchell, right? I think he's a big guard, heavy guard, strong, really. I expect him to be able to guard both guard positions, ones as well as twos. I think he's best suited as a slasher, and I think he's improved as a 3-point shooter from his freshman year into his sophomore year. And Usman Garuba, had him at the end of my big board on my last video. Now I have him being selected 24. I think he's really raw, but with that defensive upside, I think Houston can afford to let his offensive game run out. When you really watch him play overseas, he's not really used all that much. He's really just spotting up in the corner most of the time. But I think you could really take advantage of Usman Garuba's athleticism as a role man. And if that shot continues to develop, he could be a valuable floor spacer. But really his value is on the defensive end, where he could, along with, like a Kenyon Martin or a Jay Sean Tate, could really establish a defensive identity with how hard he plays defensively. I think being able to switch multiple positions, along with, if they do select Evan Mobley, Houston could establish a real scary defensive identity, moving forward. At pick 25, I have the Clippers selecting Isaiah Jackson. Isaiah Jackson, I think, is the third best big in this class. But again, given, the way the NBA is trending, I just don't believe Isaiah Jackson is, I've seen a lot of people have it mocked at, 11 to the Hornets, and I just don't think that's good enough value at that 11th pick, considering Isaiah Jackson is, going to be a rim rolling big, but, how valuable is a rim rolling two-way big at 11? But at 25, I think that's great value, especially looking at the Clippers, a team that doesn't really have a player like him where he's an athletic rim runner. They don't really have that, given how slow Zubac is, and as well as how old Ibaka is and how injury prone he is with those back issues. So Isaiah Jackson come in, give them an athletic two-way rim runner that they don't really have. And, when they do face up a big man, when they do go up against a big man like Ayton in the playoffs, where they can't play him off the floor with their small ball, they could throw Jackson out there who can muscle and bang, as well as rim roll and give Paul George and Kawhi and potentially Reggie Jackson, if he comes back, a real role man to work with. Moving on to picks 26, we're going to kind of speed it. I have Davion Mitchell going at 26. I really don't think Davion Mitchell is a top 20 pick. I think he's a slightly better version of Patrick Beverley, and I don't think that's worth a top 25 pick in this draft. I do think he'd be a great fit with Denver. He's one of the best perimeter defenders in the draft, and I think that's Denver's biggest weakness is their perimeter defense. Even when that team was fully healthy for like those 10 games, right after the trade deadline with Jamal Murray and Aaron Gordon and Jokic and Michael Porter. I didn't think they were going to go all the way in the playoffs just because they had no perimeter defenders. Right, Murray's not a plus defender. Monte Morris is certainly not a plus defender. Facu, as much as he tries, he's only 5'9", so there's not much he can really do. While Davion Mitchell will come in and give them a big body on defense, as well as a player who can space the floor for them on offense, assuming that jump shot is at least respectable. Moving on to pick 27, I have the Brooklyn Nets selecting Scottie Barnes. This is really where I think, again, Scottie Barnes should go. A player, he's really a role player. He's a role player. I think he'd come in, give defensive versatility to this Brooklyn Nets team that, we all know about their defensive struggles. He give them a big body and an athletic rim runner for them. And, with all that talent around Scottie Barnes, I think you could see flashes of his playmaking ability. So, I think this is as good of a fit as it gets for Scottie, where he doesn't have to worry about shooting the ball or any of his weaknesses, right? If he does go as high as like 6, you're going to see his weaknesses, outlined. Whereas, if he went to the Brooklyn Nets with, KD, Kyrie, Joe Harris, James Harden, he'd just be worrying about, finding those guys, attacking the seams, hitting the open man. In transition, he could be running with Kyrie or KD or Joe Harris, spotting up in running to the corners in the fast break, where he could really take advantage of, slashing. Some defenders will have to be worrying about those guys, so they go out to them while he can attack the paint, or he can find ways to hit those guys. As he's a great playmaker in transition. And defensively, he could play small ball 5 and switch multiple positions. So I think this is the best fit for Scottie Barnes, and I think this is, if he goes to 27, he's going to look very, very good. Pick 28, I have the 76ers selecting Joe Wieskamp. Again, another guy similar to Jason Preston, where I have him much higher than the consensus. But I think I've went over why I think he's better than Corey Kispert in my previous video. If you want to hear my opinion on that, go check out that video. But he would give Philly something that they haven't really had since Jay Redick, a guy who can not only spot up and hit threes and space the floor for Ben Simmons and Harris and Embiid, but a guy who can run off screens, run through a lot of different sets, can catch one dribble, sidestep, catch one dribble, really not really. He doesn't really step back, but he doesn't really sidestep. It's more kind of like diagonally, like he doesn't really step back all the way, but I guess you could say step backs. It's more like a diagonal step back. He's really good at that. He has some playmaking capabilities in transition, so I think he could be a really fun player for Philly, and I think he could fit in right away and space the floor, be a great shooter for their stars. At 29, I have Phoenix going with Josh Christopher. He's a shot creator for them. I'm not a big fan of Josh Christopher, but I think with Phoenix, he come in and give them scoring off the bench, which they sorely need. A guy who can get his own shot outside of campaign. We saw that kind of in the playoffs. It was really either Devin Booker or nothing. And I think if they had a player like Josh Christopher in there, who when teams do kind of shut down Chris Paul or campaign, and it's really just Devin Booker or nothing, you can maybe throw Josh Christopher on the floor with Devin Booker and another guy who would just get his own buckets, which I think that's really one of Phoenix's only weakness. And then at 30, with the last pick in the first round, I have Corey Kispert going to the Utah Jazz. A team that really has a lot of what Kispert already offers, but I think he would come in automatically and be the best shooter, even though they do have a lot of shooting, some playmaking opportunities, and I think he would really give them more of what they already have. But again, getting a shooter like Corey Kispert, especially a shooter, he's really a catch and shoot shooter, which is why I have him so low, is because he's the best catch and shoot shooter in the draft, but it's only stationary, right? He's not like Joe Wieskamp, where he can run off screens or really create his own shot. It's really just catch and shoot shooting, but he's a damn good catch and shoot shooter. Not much of a defender, not much of a playmaker, not really all that athletic. So he's just offering catch and shoot shooting. I've said that a lot of times. You could catch and shoot shooting, catch and shoot shooting, but that's really all he's offering. So I didn't think that's worth anything higher than the pick at 30. And especially looking at these teams with these fits, they need more than a guy who could just catch and shoot, a spot of shooter. So I think even though it's redundant to what Utah already has, adding more shooting is never a bad thing. So that's who I have Utah going with at 30. And that's the end of the mock draft, you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Again, these picks are not, the consensus. These are based on, the time that I've spent watching each prospect individually, my assessment on each prospect and, where I think they fit the best with which team and, which range I think they should go in. This is influenced by, again, my big board on the rankings that I have of these prospects, not really everybody else's ranking, because at the end of the day, I could have sat here and, told you Jalen Suggs, to at 4 to the Raptors and Kuminga at 5 to the Magic. But again, that'd just be going with everybody else as opposed to, my opinion and the time that I've spent on these prospects. And, what's the point of making a video where I just agree with everything that, Bleacher Report and Tankathon says, right? Why not? I put the time in to watch all these guys, and this is my opinion on them after watching them. So I went with my opinion. Again, I could completely be wrong. I could look like a fool once these guys start playing, but this is my mock draft on where I think everybody should go. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I can't wait for the draft Thursday. I am going to be recording my reaction to the Knicks picks, as I am a diehard Knicks fan. Knicks, Giants, Mets, as you can see with the Giants hat. I've worn my Knicks hat in other videos. So I am going to be recording my reaction and analysis on whatever the Knicks decide to do, whether they move up, trade for a star, trade back, trade up, or they stay at 19 and 21 and pick who they pick. I'm going to be reacting to that. And I'm going to be uploading it on here. And as well as after the draft, I'm going to be, grading each pick and each team's draft haul. So look forward to that, guys. Can't wait for the draft. This next season, this off season really is going to be really exciting. I can't wait to cover it and continue to upload videos. And I just want to say thank you so much for the support, guys. I really started my YouTube channel like 2 weeks ago. I just turned 18. It's pretty crazy to have the amount of success that I have already. It might not look like all that much, but I really appreciate all the people that are supporting the channel and commenting and even if you guys do disagree with whatever I have to say, I love the discussion. I'm a huge basketball fan, as you guys could tell. So if you guys ever disagree with anything, just comment it down below. I'd love to have a conversation with anybody, because at the end of the day, it's basketball. That's what it's all about, bringing us all together. So again, thank you so much for the support, guys. Can't wait for the draft on Thursday, and hope you guys have a good day. Peace.